In the 1920s, this part of Los Angeles, San Pedro's Point Fermin, was a prime address. Palm-lined streets wound along seaside bluffs where bungalows overlooked the Pacific and red trolley cars rolled past on coastal tracks. Well, this was the case at least until 1929, when an entire section of the cliffside neighborhood began to slide slowly towards the water below. The momentum was gradual at first, with the city calling it just a minor soil disturbance, but the situation progressed to the point that suddenly homes cracked in half, pipes burst, and roads vanished. In other words, locals watched a neighborhood collapse, and today the spot is known as Sunken City, a fenced-off ruin where fragments of streetcar rails, sidewalks, sewer lines, and concrete foundations still poke through the dirt. So how did this dream neighborhood come to crumble into the sea, and what remains among its rubble? Stay tuned to find out, as today we uncover the story of Sunken City, the neighborhood that slid into the sea. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's head back to the early 20th century, when LA was laying track, pouring concrete, and carving neighborhoods into places that no city planner had previously imagined. Back then, the land was cheap. The climate was ideal, and developers were eager to turn the empty bluffs into a suburban paradise. Nowhere was this ambition more visible than in San Pedro. By the 1920s, San Pedro had already transformed from a dusty outpost into the official port of Los Angeles. It was a working-class harbor town, anchored by shipping, shipbuilding, and naval infrastructure. But high above the docks, another kind of vision took shape. That's where George H. Peck came in. A real estate developer and self-made millionaire, Peck saw promise in the cliffs of Point Fermin. Hence, he carved out a coastal neighborhood on a stretch of land overlooking the Pacific. The lots were modest, but the views were priceless. Small bungalows, manicured yards, and narrow streets all wrapped around the cliffside curve, with Karolina Island almost just floating on the horizon. Transport was also robust, as red cars, Los Angeles' famed electric trolleys, offered direct service to these homes. According to the local planning documents of the time, this appeared to be a self-contained dream. Close enough to the city, quiet enough to feel removed, and built on land that seemed as solid as any. A state of affairs that attracted many working-class families. Children played in the street. Neighbors greeted each other from porches that stared straight out at the sea. These were dock workers, Navy men, teachers, and civil servants who made up the heart of this growing community. The homes weren't grand, but they were dependable. Well, at least they seemed that way. From the start, the soil was indeed loose, but no one took proper notice at first. Even as water seepage was spotted at the cliff base, no one seemed too worried. Perhaps this was just an inconvenient truth. Remember, the neighborhood had streetcars, gas lines, plumbing, concrete sidewalks, and so on. It had permanent infrastructure, and with that came an illusion of safety. But under the surface, not all was stable, a fact that came to light in the winter of 1928 when a strange crack was reported in a front yard near Paseo del Mar. City officials investigated and chalked it up to drainage issues, though there were a few other strange coincidences happening within the same time frame. For example, a gas main ruptured. Then, a water line burst beneath a local hotel. And yet, the people were in a state of denial, disregarding these accidents as just minor incidences, all of which were explained away as routine. By spring of 1929, the signs were impossible to ignore. Pavement began to fragment, front lawns slumped, whereas the streetcar tracks, once perfectly aligned, buckled and wrapped into unnatural curves. Homes didn't tumble overnight, but they leaned, slowly and unnervingly, as the soil beneath them sheared away from the bluff, until at least one home reportedly shifted several feet in a single afternoon. This was a red flag, and for safety reasons, the gas lines were shut off and the streets were barricaded, with the residents being told to prepare for relocation. But it was all too little, too late. Between May and December of 1929, an entire section, Point Fermin, began collapsing into the sea. In total, 6 acres of land shifted more than 40 feet downhill, with 2 houses falling completely. Dozens more were evacuated, lifted from their foundations, and relocated in a desperate attempt to salvage what could be saved. Newspaper accounts at the time described the event as, quote, strange, spectacular, and even slow motion. But for the families who lived there, it wasn't a curiosity. It it was a kind of limbo, especially since in the early phases of this disaster, the neighborhood hadn't yet vanished, but it could no longer function, meaning property owners couldn't sell their home, nor could they safely live in them. They just had to watch the entire estate slide into the sea bit by bit. And that might be the most haunting part of the story. The neighborhood didn't vanish in a single day. It unraveled over weeks and months. The signs were there. People saw them, but uncertainty breeds inaction. Some residents packed up, others waited, the city hesitated, and by the time the consequences were undeniable, there was no path forward. The residents were stuck. A situation not really unique to just this story. For example, if you're feeling stuck in your job, uncertain about what's next, or just tired of trying to figure it all out on your own, let's take a quick pause to hear about an offer from today's sponsor, Strawberry.me, a career coaching platform that matches you with a certified coach who's 100% focused on helping you move forward. It's not therapy, but it's like therapy for your career. Your coach helps you get clear on your goals, navigate challenges at work, and build a strategy to move from where you are to where you want to be. Whether you're going for a promotion, switching industries, or just trying to reignite your motivation, this is how you get out of neutral. I tried a session, and honestly, it was a great surprise. It wasn't judgmental. There were no empty phrases. It was just a real space to think. I was even able to organize a lot of ideas that I had about this channel's projects, figuring out what was holding me back, and most importantly, committing to what I wanted to change. No fluff, no hustle hype, just clarity, new momentum, and someone in my corner. So go to strawberry.me/itshistory and use code ITSHISTORY to claim your $50 credit, or scan the QR code on screen and take the short quiz to get matched with a certified coach. Because no one rewrites their future by waiting around. And sometimes the smartest move you can make is asking for the right kind of help. Big thanks to strawberry.me for sponsoring this episode. But now, back to our story. As the land shifted, it left behind a surreal landscape. City engineers called this erosion, but it was a landslide. According to geologic studies cited in the Los Angeles Times, the land moved as much as 11 inches per day at its peak. This wasn't just a shift, it was a full-scale collapse. And the exact cause? A dangerous combination of bentonite clay in the soil, poor drainage, heavy winter rains, and the fact that the land's underlying layers, the formation, sloped directly towards the sea. And the story doesn't end here. Long after the first batch of homes was gone, the ground kept shifting. And with that, the area became a disaster zone. By December of 1929, the shifting earth had torn apart much of the neighborhood's 600 block. And while most of the homes had been previously lifted and carted away just in time, 2 of them weren't so lucky. The families had already evacuated, but the structures remained only to face a rather dramatic fate. Witnesses described the exact moment that they went into the sea, recalling, quote, "The hillside was yawning open like a curtain, the houses tipping slowly at first before giving way to gravity. Both buildings fell from the cliffs and broke apart in the surf, battered by waves that slammed into the wreckage for days afterwards." The Los Angeles Times painted the scene as urgent and tragic, whereas other press outlets took an almost naive approach. For example, the San Pedro news pilot, citing advice from local geologists, dismissed the early warning signs as drainage issues, and they assumed that it would all be patched up once the pipes were fixed and the cracks were filled. And of course, we now know that they were wrong. By year's end, the crack had grown to over 12 feet wide. 5 acres of land had given way. Streets, sidewalks, power lines, sewer mains, all of it collapsed into a slow-moving catastrophe. Even part of Point Fermin Park was lost in this landslide. And as the situation became more dire, geologists changed their tone, describing the phenomenon as a, quote, slump, a textbook example of geological failure in slow motion. By the 1930s, Sunken City had become a kind of open wound on the bluff. The city hadn't given up yet. They filled in some of the cracks and temporarily even refilled some of the streets. But as the land continued to shift, they eventually realized that it was a lost cause. And upon that realization, there were no more formal conservation efforts, and ultimately, the city just built fences to keep trespassers out as Mother Nature finished the job. Though by the 1960s, a seeping curiosity took hold as the legend of the city that fell into the sea began to spread throughout local communities, which brought in the first wave of visitors. But by the 1970s, The cement slabs and foundations basically became a regional retreat for burnouts. By the 1980s, graffiti crews showed up with a slew of punk rock kids, the likes of which would bring major disturbances to the remaining families that called this seaside area home. And let's just say that it wouldn't take long for their patience to run thin. By the 1980s, Sunken City wasn't just an abandoned neighborhood. It had become a magnet for chaos. What started as a quiet curiosity promptly morphed into something else entirely, drawing massive crowds that weren't there in any way to appreciate the history. They came to party, to vandalize, and to get away with activities that I can't even mention here on YouTube. But we can leave it at this. They came to destroy. Police logs from the time documented repeated calls, including trespassing, noise complaints, and fights. According to a 1986 report from the Los Angeles Times, nearby residents described nights of chaos, fireworks, bonfires, smashed bottles, drug use, violence, and carloads of partiers who left the neighborhood littered with trash and vandalism. It was so bad that one woman from the area said that she hadn't slept through a night in months. Another article from the same year was even more direct. Its title, quote, "Intruders Romp Through San Pedro's Sunken City." It documented how teens used the ruins as a, quote, "makeshift nightclub," complete with stereos blasting into the ocean breeze. With that in mind, the residents organized and fought back. They attended city council meetings, demanded more patrols, and even called for arrests. The residents were outraged. They wanted floodlights, and they wanted barbed wire. But then, the media twisted things into a scandal, with one Newspilot article quoting a resident referring to the visitors as undesirables, a remark that further sparked controversy over class and public access. Hence, that same year, the city finally responded with a new, sturdier fence, but deliberately left the barbed wire off to avoid bad optics. For a moment, the balance seemed to be restored, but as new gaps opened in the fence, foot traffic and, dare I say, undesirables returned. In the 1990s, Sunken City became a backdrop in student films, music videos, and independent photography projects, since its post-apocalyptic look made it irresistible to visual storytellers. That attention only intensified dramatically in the 2000s and 2010s. One standout moment happened in 2015, when the Fear of the Walking Dead season finale featured scenes shot at Sunken City. The ruins played themselves, a shattered, haunting remnant of civilization. According to the Daily Breeze, the show's use of the site reignited public interest, leading to surges of new visitors and renewing the debate over access and safety. But then, things were further exacerbated when blogs like Atlas Obscura began featuring the Sunken City as, quote, "a hidden treasure, a place to visit if you dared." Social media influencers then showed up, drawing way more attention than any local resident wanted. At this point, the city was not ready for a return to the 1980s. The times have changed, and officials issued warnings. LAPD increased patrols, but it was all too little too late. And I've got to say, I understand the public interest, but I'll never understand why people have so little regard for what would otherwise be a fascinating urban ruin. Over the years, vandals have erased the fallen town's legacy, and now little remains. Now, be that as it may, it's time to have a look at what has been left behind. Starting with the sidewalks, several concrete strips ran through the slide zone, often half buried or broken, though they're still there, edged in with curbs and street gutters. It takes some imagination, but once you spot the layout, it's unmistakable. This was a full neighborhood grid. And if you look closely, you'll find the remains of twisted trolley tracks. Twisted lengths of rusted rail from the old Pacific Electric red car line that once served this neighborhood. In some areas, the track peeks through, a reminder that mass transit was once threaded through this cliffside community. The foundations of at least 5 homes are also still visible, most notably near the southern edge of the slide. Some are no more than flattened rectangles of concrete, others still show fragments of things like tile roofing, doorsteps, and even rebar from the original supports. These are the footprints of bungalows that once faced the ocean. The ruins of old retaining walls are also visible, blocks of poured concrete now sitting at odd angles, often buried under decades of graffiti. But you need to look closely since some parts of this are hidden beneath palms and scrub bush. There are also old sewer pipes poking out in places, cracked and exposed within this unusual maze that constitutes LA's strangest urban disaster. And beyond that, only memories remain. But we can keep this story alive by simply sharing the video with a friend or hitting that subscribe button to grow the channel's prevalence on YouTube. Otherwise, I thank you all for watching, and until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.